Greetings. Guten Tag. Talofa. This is Dr. Snow Brown, catching up with all of you, especially my Snow King Club congregation that are part of my CKC TV Facebook, part of Crystal Kingdom Church TV. You're still with me? Right, as you can all see that the kingdom reopened itself again. Ideally, it should be closed until the 23rd of April, 2028. That's correct. Now, as you would have already seen, that's correct. There's been some stuff going on inside my kingdom. So the kingdom has reopened again. Now, as for my 150 Days War program, this is my beloved Knights and Chiefs, I'm afraid that has come to a stop. So I'm no longer. In fact, I would be more inclined to say that I'm on vacation now. I've taken leave. Special leave. That's correct. And I think it's because you all know very well what I'm having to deal with at the moment. And that is the willful trespass charge. But I recently signed a notice of bail for. They're at the Hutt Valley District Court on the 9th of June 2022. Now, here, of course, in New Zealand, trespass charges, that's correct, seems to be a very serious charge, actually. Well, it's part of the culture in New Zealand, that such charges are actually taken really serious. That's correct. Especially if you've got a history, a criminal history record about such charges. That, of course, that the system seem to be really good at creating in this country. Of course, that cannot be helped if, say, part of that history was some of those willful trespass charges, breaches, or violations going back a long time ago, were to do with a civil political protest. That's correct. That were long, what? I didn't consider them to be very serious back then. Now, because of this so-called lame, I call it frivolous, butthole charge that has been entered against me for all the wrong reasons, it can only be, well, of course, racist. Why? Because, well, this charge didn't need to be proceeded this way and didn't have to be entered, of course. If the reason being, if it's justified that I entered the property in question to serve a trespass notice that I, assumed had expired. But of course, that doesn't help if I had burned the so-called, the complainant's so-called official trespass notice that was served by Officer Shane Reed on the 6th of August 2020. So it was still valid. But still, I think, considering the fact that it wasn't serious, for this charge to be activated, let alone to be entered, because, well, it's been 14 years since I last was, convicted of such charges. So this recent one that I just had entered against my criminal record after having a clean slate for the last 14 years, and I've never been in jailbird, to be honest. That's correct. This charge is just lame. It's just, I call it frivolous butthole charge. It's not necessary. It wasn't life-threatening either. Although for me to enter the property, well, it was life-threatening. That's correct. And you also know that I'm about to file 3 or 4 restraining orders. That's correct. That is part of the so-called charge against this complainant. Now, the complainant, of course, you would have all read my affidavit. That affidavit that I prepared, of course, for my court appearance on the 9th of June 2022, that is now going to be amended, rewritten up. That was going to be my defense, of course, and also to get me off the charge of willful trespass charge, off the so-called lame, frivolous, butthole willful trespass charge. It shouldn't even have been entered in the first place by the police, let alone by the sergeant of the local police station. What I'm saying is this charge, that's correct. I've got bail conditions that are just before me here that I'm looking at right now. And it's called the Notice of Bail to the Defendant. Do I feel like a criminal? Well, not really, but you kind of feel that way. When you appear in court and you sign bail conditions like these, you really do feel like it. But in all honesty, I don't, possibly because I'm too bright. I'm too smart for this. That's correct. For this kind of so-called lame, sort of almost like saying, what do you call it? Juvenile delinquent kind of charge. Kind of reminds me of, only teenagers, that's correct, should be getting these sort of charges. I'm 49 going on 50, and I'm having to relive the so-called nightmare, that's correct, of a lame little charge like this. This is ridiculous, I know. But of course, this cannot be helped because it was a genuine mistake. And I think according from my affidavit, of course, I wrote that affidavit. Every qualified lawyer in New Zealand would know the value of that affidavit of mine. And that's right, the 5 submissions that are mentioned inside my affidavit are genuine. And you can't fault that kind of argument, defense, that's correct. Those are not lies at all. That's actually the truth as it stands, that's correct. So say for example, I don't call myself a defense lawyer because I didn't go to university to complete a four-year degree, law degree, to become a defense attorney or a defense lawyer. This is a gift that I obtained naturally. I studied law for 1 year, that's correct. Now, of course, by some miracle, I did pass Laws 101 or the 100 level, year 1 level law paper, that's correct. But of course, once I got banned for 2 years, that extended to 6 years, which was ridiculous. I couldn't go back to finish my law degree, that's correct. So do you think I would want to go back after 6 years of being banned from there? Unjustifiably? Or because some white nigger thought that I deserved to be banned for 6 years? No, I didn't deserve it. So now we look at those so-called affidavit that I prepared with the 5 submissions regarding the defense. Right, those are not lies. Those are actually based on facts and are truthful and correct. That's correct. So I could still use that affidavit, that's correct, for my adjournment hearing, or for the hearing, the court appearance that I'm going to appear on the 28th of July, 2022 at 10 a.m. there at the Hart Valley District Court. So I could still use it. Yes, I could, because, I think it'll be very hard for a presiding judge, to dispute, let alone discredit those 5 submissions, that affidavit of mine. That's correct, because I can prove it in court. And of course, they're based on facts. It's based on truth. That's correct. It's not based on fabrication or false accusations. No, it's based on truth. That's correct. The complainant is an associate of a criminal organization, which I am not. So therefore, I am a noble. Yes, I'm a noble. I'm director. I do own a company. Yes, I do. That is part of my private ministry. On Facebook, I'm also a job seeker. Yes. Now, in terms of whether I am actually sick, in terms of do I have a mental disorder? No, I don't, because I can prove it in court that I don't have a mental disorder. Yes, that's correct. Although I did suffer from depression, but that mental illness or mental disorder was healed. 2011, according to my assessment by ACC, that's correct. 5%. So I was no longer entitled to an independent allowance. That's correct, that I gave every 3 months. So that's that. Now, is there any other mental disorder that I might suffer from? No. According to my medications that I'm on at the moment, I take metformin, which is for my type 2 diabetes. And also I take 2 types of high blood pressure tablets. And I also am on simvastatin, which is a cholesterol tablet. Now, have I been taking any antidepressants? No, there's no need for it, because like I said, I have recovered from my depression that I suffered from 1996. That by 2006, in all honesty, I had fully recovered from it. Although that's correct. That's another story. So in terms of the order of supervision that I got, dealt to, and that was orchestrated and set up by 2 officers with the service of the trespass notice that belonged to Tony Shaw. That's correct. I believe that was all orchestrated. It was a cover-up. It was actually a cover-up. And of course, and then diagnosed you with some false mental disorder that you did not suffer from. That's correct. For erythemania. That was part of the fulfillment of the order of supervision sentence. Where you underwent cognitive behavioral therapy for a year and took risperidone, antidepressant of a type of antidepressant that piled on the weight. That's correct. Being the side effects of that such a antidepressant medication. But then it got extended over 7 years. Now, I had not breached any bail conditions in terms of that particular case. That's correct. But you see how that lawyer was able to abuse his privileges as a lawyer and also as a member of the elite to extend those conditions, which he had no right to do, which I am going to give him on a restraining order. That's correct. He had no right, that's correct, to drug you for over 7 years and misdiagnose you with a false mental disorder. That's correct. And he didn't need to bring you into the courts to declare you insane. Why was that necessary? Well, I think if we wind the clock forward, we can understand why. That's correct. And then obviously stolen a copy of your play that was written back in 2006, for which they gave you the second nosebleed deliberately that was induced via drugging and poisoning. That's correct. That can only be an MMBKK harmful protocol. Yeah, you can see what they are now doing with this so-called charge here. It feels like another nightmare that amounts to an experiment MMBKK harmful protocol. That's correct. I'll say this in all honesty, and I'll be very thankful with all of you, especially those that are living in New Zealand. I don't need to say Aotearoa, or I refer to as Aotearoa. Now, I'm Dr. Snowbrown. I definitely am Dr. Snowbrown. And my type of private ordination is a national pastor. And those rules are part of my ordination. And my kingdom is part of my crown and my throne that is meek and part of my private monarch. Brown monarch, that's correct. Now, those are my treasures and those are my intellectual properties. How dare you undermine my so-called natural gifts and talents? That's correct. How they've stolen from you. Back in 1986, well, Mr. Brick stole your so-called, womanhood. That's correct. He didn't need to do that. He was married. He was happily married. Was it necessary for him and your rallies to set you up back in 1986 with such an evil, that's correct, terrible thing to do? That's correct. And then in 2001, they set you up with the computer course. Your rallies are a bunch of sick son of a bitches, all right? But I mean terribly evil. I bet you every time they listen to your videos that you've been preaching about on your CKCTV Facebook, that a lot of them would say, oh, she's just like her daddy. Oh, she definitely just like her daddy. Except she's smarter than her daddy. That's correct. Can you imagine how they stole a copy of your play? They even applied your rules all these years, or let's just say they studied you through the Tony Shaw and his order of supervision for over 7 years. They even screen and monitor you in private, in secret. And they're doing this so-called experiment setup of yours here inside this building. Same thing. All they do is steal from you and study you. And absorb all the knowledge that they could possibly get their greedy little hands, grubby little hands on. That's correct. Because they know you are a Pākehā. Well, of course you are. But probably the one thing they don't like about you is that you're a different kind of Pākehā. We just don't seem to engage in sex with many. I don't think you've ever had any sex with any Maoris. That's correct. And you just don't seem to do the same with any elite here in this country, nor with any Pākehās. That's correct. And I guess they don't like that arrangement of yours, 4950, but you just don't seem to. You just don't seem to do it. That's correct. Engage in free sex for all. That's correct. Well, I guess my daddy and my mummy set me a good example. I tried to. Which was, well, there's 7 of us. 1 bro and 6 sisters. We were, of course, created for the purpose of, we were supposed to marry. Get engaged and marry and be happy. That's correct. That's how we were taught. And of course, we're a royal family. We don't need to say that. Obviously, Dad's side of the family had other ideas by the looks of things. They most certainly did. Oh, I might look indigenous, all right, but I ain't Maori. I don't project or emulate Māori ora. Whakapapa, kaupapa, whatever you call it. I don't. And, of course, you guys will never be in agreement with the conditions of my CKCTV Facebook. Now, is that my problem? That I was created for a different purpose? I most certainly was not created for an improper purpose. I can tell you right now. And I was not created for an ultra-virus purpose either, all the time. When you consider what the Pākehā have been up to with the Māori order in this country. But again, they don't like you. And do I care? Does my queen care? No, she does not. That is correct. Good thing that, you do have manners. You're not terribly rude like a lot of them, like the rest of them. The way that they've been carrying on, violating your boundaries, invading your privacy, stealing from you, whenever they could get their grubby little hands, at every opportunity they could get. That's correct. Stole. Stole your womanhood, virginity, back in 1996. Then, of course, via the police officer who was supposed to do his job on the 24th of June 2003. That's correct, to the 25th of June, the next morning for the court appearance. He then violated you, drugged you and violated you. Now, is that an MBKK harmful protocol? Why do they need to take advantage? Your rallies are really freaking evil, right? That they actually got a police officer, it's actually one of their associates, to violate you. Meaning, tamper with you, contaminate you, touch you in an inappropriate manner without my consent. Is that the second time they stole something? The second time again they violated you. What isn't enough with Mr. Prick back in 96? Now this time, it was with a white man, white nigger. That's correct. One of the most arrogant son of a bitches, all right. Oh, he deserves the bullet to the head, all right, to the third eye. No, I can sort of imagine the two officers that I recall that processed you that evening after 4 o'clock. That's correct. And I'm thinking, I can sort of sense that's correct. I hope to God that I wasn't violated by 2 or 3 officers. That's correct. But I get the impression that there might have been 2 of them. What a horrible predicament, let alone nightmare to wake up to. That's correct. Now you can see why Mr. so-called Tony Shaw gave you the order of supervision and drugged you over 7 years. It wasn't because of the mental disorder that I was falsely diagnosed with. I mean, if you're seriously going to do that for 2 willful trespass charges, are you serious? You fucking son of a bitch, that's correct. What right did you need to do that to me for? I'd have to say that they wanted to cover up the so-called violation of you by the officers. They didn't want you to remember, that's correct, what had actually happened to you that evening. Let alone who had done it. And now, all of a sudden, the setup here at this address, I think it's so strategically calculated. It's so obvious. Your rallies are so evil. That's correct. It seems like they had known about your private, really private stuff. Private. And I mean intimate stuff. That's correct. With Mr. Brick. And then it also looks like they had also known about the police officer. And Mr. Willow. This one, I'm going to say right now, hey, was it Auntie Inky? I don't call her aunt at all. A lot of dads, so-called brothers, wives, I do not have respect for any of them. That's correct. Yes, that's right, Auntie Inky. Let me remind you again, Auntie Inky. That's right, I remember one time, we were sleeping in the evening, about 4 Davis Crescent, down just a couple of road. And I remember that, I do remember sending Mr. Willow, that's correct, a Christmas card. And I did mention something about Mrs. Santa. And then, of course, Inky Spinky, that's correct. Rain Trevorana's so-called wifey, that's correct. She said something discreetly, Mrs. Santa. And that's when I know. I said, Tony Shaw, you are one hell of a, that's correct. How can one of your dad's brother's wife, that's correct, say something like that privately, like she knew something? You know what that tells me? That lawyer, whose name is called Tony Shaw, he actually knows your rallies really well. That's correct. He does. He knows Mr. and Mrs. Yoke in Timarua. That's correct. Heinz Trevoranas. And his so-called queen, Mrs. Etalana Trevoranas. That's correct. And he also knows, in fact, he actually has spoken to them on the phone. they're very close friends with. This is what I'm picking up. That's right, from the guy in the Angel Savalama and Archangel Warren. Thank you very much, guys. That's correct. That they're also apparently are very close friends with Lee Shaw. Might have been the manager of Remote Client Unit. How lovely. They all seem to know each other. That all those trespass notices that you served, 18 of them, they all seem to know each other really well. And they all conspired to talk about you behind your back, but also to orchestrate and set up, bit of this, bit of that. That's great. Tit for tat. Oh, they're good, all right. They certainly like to gang up on you, all right. And they don't like you at all. I don't know why. Hey, I never did anything to them. You never harmed any of them. You never denied them any of their privileges. That's correct. Behind their backs. Nor did you ever do anything to harm them. I think the problem was that they are part of that evil criminal organization, being the red one and the white one. MBKK, which you have nothing to do with. And all they tried to do was take full advantage of your gifts and talents. I know. You must be the most interesting Trevoranus out of all the Trevoranus to study. You can imagine now, that's correct, what the courts are hoping to do with you. Let's hope they're not going to study you, because that's exactly what they've been doing all these years. So, you must be the only Trevoranus, that's correct, that has ever been convicted in the courts of New Zealand for willful trespass charges. That has ever been given so many long banning decisions that actually violates the Crime of Torture Act 1989 and the Harassment Act of 1997, and also other, legislations. That's correct. You must be the only one. You're also the only Trevoranus who has, a Bachelor of Arts in Linguistics and a Bachelor of Honours, 3rd class. Well, it's not really fantastic. You're not quite like, Dr. Ludwig Trevoranus. That's correct. But you are good enough. You know what I mean? The only one that is qualified out of all the Trevoranus, that's correct, who's been banned from university for 6 years, but regarding willful trespass charges, trespass notice, I know. And the only one as well, that's correct, that's ever been banned from work and income, that covered all 10 branches of Wellington region, that then stretched to 8 years, that's correct. And you're the only Trevoranus, that's correct, Trevoranus, that's ever been banned from a social club, from an upper hut cozy club, that's correct, from a social club in the local community. You're the first, again, you're the first one. And the only one, that's correct. Is there another one? Is there another legacy that is connected to your so-called miraculous, incredible, so-called great reputation? Your name? Almarilia Eileen Trevoranus? Well, is there another legacy? No, I think that's about sums it up. Yeah, that's a lot. There's a lot to carry, I know. And then, of course, you're Dr. Snow Brown. Title. Man, they like to say that you're a sick woman. But in terms of the fact, when you consider all those long banning decisions, that none of the Trevoranus, has ever received and has ever been targeted for. You're the only one. You're like the eldest of the eldest. That's correct. And yet you got all those decisions. Has it ever occurred to you, how come you, that's correct, out of all the grandchildren and even the great-grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren, got dealt to and targeted by so many people in this region of the country? I mean, you're a Lone Ranger, that's correct. And there's so many of them. And now, finally, the truth has been revealed. It's because they've all been conspiring against you. But it's because of the fact that some of your rallies have got some evil, bad criminal connections. And it's the red one, red demon, and the white demon. That's correct. It's not your problem. It's not your fault. That's correct. That you're not, you can't be as bad as some of them, that you don't associate with evil people. You don't associate with criminals. That's correct. That's not your problem. Hey, I might live among them inside this address. There's 5 MMB inside here. That's correct. But that don't make me one. That's correct. I'm still a noble. I'm still a full royal. That's correct. And I can smile about it. I mean, I got a clean criminal record. I mean, just with this one willful trespass charge that's re-popped up again in my... I'm thinking, isn't it lovely that the New Zealand police here in this country have got a bad habit of creating bad history? For a lot of PIs and a lot of so-called indigenous-looking people. That's correct. That they specifically, they actually orchestrate some of those sort of, past history. But I would never have thought that they would actually create. I mean, keep that all on file and record so that later on, 14 years later down the track, that if you recommit another willful trespass charge, that they could just bring it all back. That they could just bring it all back and remind you again. That's correct. Oh, you've done it. She's done it again. That's correct. Only this time, if she does it, she might not be so lucky like last time. We might actually take advantage of this charge and, bring other stuff so that we can take her to jailbird. I mean, we've been trying to take her to jailbird. We've been trying. I know. Amazing, isn't it? What they do. And yet, hey, you got to check my criminal record. There is no other charges other than willful trespass. That's correct. There is no other charges. That's correct. So if you think you can pull a good one over me, when you read those kind of affidavit, I don't know what the value is of something like that. If I was a qualified lawyer, I can tell you right now, the hourly rate for a lot of qualified lawyers, about 300. I think it's gone up to 400 now per hour. 300 now. For me, I would say that affidavit is worth about 5,000. In fact, it's worth about 3,000 to 5,000, or even 10,000. From a noble's level. That's great. I'm a noble. That's great. But you see, I could easily do the same for... I mean, I am so well known for willful trespass charges. But I mean, it's something that's just... most so-called half-caste Pākehās wouldn't be as clued up as you. That's correct. Know so much about, trespass cases and stuff like that. I think it's the fact that you've been thrown among the wolves. That's correct. You've been chucked in the deep end all the time that I've just had to learn to survive. But I've just had to learn, to grab whatever weapon I've got right there. And defend myself and defend myself. That's correct. So, the 28th of July, let's hope, I'm just reading the so-called, the bail conditions. And they're actually very dangerous. They are actually dangerous. I know. It's ridiculous. I think it's the fact that we're dealing with somebody, a complainant, that is actually an associate of a criminal organization. There's a really dangerous criminal organization. In fact, these two criminal organizations have been the ones that have been targeting you in the last 25 years. That's correct. Through your so-called rallies, evil, bad connections. That is correct. So, I mean, I'm looking at the conditions of the bail, and it says, is to reside at my address. Right. That's standard. That's correct. The next one is not to associate or have contact directly or indirectly with other persons, namely the complainant in question. That's correct. And not to go to Bircham Street, Taita. So the Deputy Registrar had already explained to me what those bail conditions mean. That if I go to Taita, I'm not to enter that street, so the whole street. That's correct. So if I should, my accident, because you could actually walk into the wrong, to that street, that's correct, then you would breach the bail condition, that's correct. And you're not to speak to that person, let alone, contact them directly or indirectly. Now, the way I read that particular bail condition is that you're not to go near that person, and you're not to speak to that person, whether it be directly or indirectly. That's correct. So that means either on their property or even outside of their property. So that means this complainant could be standing somewhere in Taita or in Lower Hutt or here in my local township or in the supermarket, and I could just be coming in, going past her. Right. I am not allowed to go near her. I am not allowed to even speak to her, let alone look at her. That's correct. Now, that's how dangerous this bail condition is. That's great, because she could accuse you of all sort of seditious crimes. That's great. Seditious, so-called, lies about me breaching my bail condition. That's great. So that's how dangerous. So you can see now on the 13th of June, just recently, on Monday, that's correct, I couldn't enter. I decided not to go to the courts to ask about these bail conditions because I was thinking of filing a restraining order, that's correct, against the complainant. And I wanted to make sure that, what would happen if whether I could file a restraining order before the 28th of July 2022. That's correct. And I suddenly realized, you know what? We don't need to go down to the courts on the 13th of June. We need to stay put right here at home. That's correct. Because you never know, these guys, especially here at this address, could set you up via the so-called complainant in question who entered this charge against you, meaning you could actually be accused of something, breaching your bail, because you could turn up at court on Monday, the 13th, that's just gone, and discover that there's the complainant standing there. That's correct. Excuse me. There's the complainant there standing there at the courts. She's probably there to deal with something else, but you're there at the same time. That's correct. So there, it's really dangerous. It's still really dangerous. The other issue is you've got the order of supervision. I think the fact that that's right. There have been some really bad accusations made against you that are prefabricated, but it's all orchestrated so that that criminal organization could target you in the future and harm you through their associates and dictate to your privileges, and dictate to your life. And this is what's happening with this bail conditions and this charge here. The complainant could misuse and abuse her privileges to have you dictated to, controlled, monitored, and search, and subjected to unreasonable search and seizure of your person via the police. The New Zealand police have got a real bad attitude when it comes to enforcing the law, especially anything to do with bail conditions and willful trespass charges, where they really want to treat you, give you the criminal treatment, where they think you need to be monitored and screened and enforced. That's correct, and blah blah blah. Now, police officers that are KKK associates and MNB associates, right? Those are the kinds that you really want to avoid, ever, at all cost, going near them, especially if you're in fact skip Taita. Don't need to be there. That's correct. But when you see those police officers, be very, very careful and very wary. That's correct. Because they could accuse you of anything. That's correct. Looking the way that you do, and Indigenous people these days. But with a last name like yours, I can't even understand, that's correct, why they need to give you the treatment of a criminal. With a last name like yours, you're a German last name. Such a last name like that is so noble but rare. When you check your criminal record, it's clean. That's correct. So the police shouldn't even look at you in that way at all. But of course, if they had known that you're educated, you got a degree, that's correct. Well, that's going to make them really jealous. They obviously have been poisoned by somebody. Either Trevor and his family or the Webster side of the family, that you're some dangerous criminal. That's correct. But in actual fact, you are like a doctor. That's correct. You're probably the most intelligent, half caste indigenous, half caste Baka. That's correct. So you can imagine now why these conditions, bail conditions, have to be complied, and also they must not be breached. So by the date of your next court appearance, the 28th of July, you must not breach those conditions, because there is a consequence if you do. Now I'll read you the consequence. This is a really interesting part. That this part's even more dangerous. That's correct. And it's the reason why we need to file a restraining order. What do you think, honey bun? You most certainly do. Because, well, living at this address, well, these guys can take advantage of these bail conditions. And also, this charge. You could be, you're not in a good situation at all. That's correct. Holy cow, that's correct. Wait for it. Now, there's the consequences if you breach the bail conditions. It states very clearly. Further note, failing to attend at court may result in a warrant to arrest being issued. If you are receiving a benefit, which I am, being a job seeker, that's correct, and a warrant to arrest is issued, your benefit may be reduced or stopped until the warrant is cleared. If this occurs, your benefit will not be paid in full until the warrant is cleared. It will not be backdated. Now, in lame terms, if you're getting, an allowance, money that the government gives you to support you because you're unemployed, the last thing you need, if you're already in destitute, you're already in a state of financial poverty, that's correct. The last thing you need, and that's for anybody who is married or single on a benefit, on a government-assisted, lifestyle, living allowance, is for your benefit, that particular avenue to be stopped, because that's what this means if you breach those conditions. The courts have the power, even the police, to stop your benefit, and even reduce it. Means they can dictate to that privilege of yours. Now, can you see how this kind of power could be abused and misused? That's correct. So, in other words, they're going to give you the treatment like a real criminal. That's correct. You're really going to feel like a criminal. So, if I forget to turn up to a court appearance, say if I don't turn up on the 28th of July at 10 a.m. for my next court appearance, the judge has a right to issue out a warrant of arrest. That's correct. And then, of course, the police will go to work and income, which is the place where we get our benefits from, or the supported allowance funds, in order for us to, pay for all our bills and whatnot, and eat. That's correct, and survive. They can go and tell them to stop my benefit. That's correct. Until the warrant is cleared, or they can reduce the rate. And if that happens, they can't backdate it. They can't backdate the money that's been taken back by the government. Now, do you think that's a fair thing to do when you're already in financial hardship and you're already struggling, and they want to make it harder for the person? That's correct. And it might be, can you imagine if people have a mental illness or a mental disorder where they could possibly forget their dates, their times and whatnot? That's correct. Man, this is so dangerous. That's correct. If somebody is sick with and you forget to turn up at court at that time. So if you're late, say for example, I was supposed to turn up there at 10 a.m. and I didn't turn up, and I rang in to say that I'm going to be running late. And yet the judge still goes ahead and decides, well, I'm still going to issue out, we'd call out her name, she didn't turn up. So I'm going to issue out to her a warrant of arrest. Now, can you imagine now what would happen if the buses, because sometimes the buses run late and the trains often run late as well. So you really want to make sure that you get there by 10 o'clock. Otherwise, the judge is going to issue out a warrant of arrest. That's correct. So can you imagine, you do a courtesy call, just as well I did, on the 9th of June, that's right, when I appeared at court to sign this bail here. I remember that I was running late. That's correct. And I rang the courts to please, delay, to put my name further at the end. That's correct. So that I wouldn't, the judge wouldn't issue out a warrant of arrest or something like that. Because that's actually what happened to me when I was dealing with the order of supervision case, where I was defending the charge. That's correct. The judge issued out a warrant of arrest when I specifically sent a fax through. Remember, I was defending the charge. I was representing myself. That's correct. And so the judge then issued out a warrant of arrest, and I'm thinking, I specifically, send a fax to let them know, that's correct, that I couldn't attend court on that day. Could they adjourn it? Well, the next thing I know, I had about 3 police cars, with 2 police coming to my address there in Whiteman's Valley, and they were there to arrest me for, breach of a bail. And this was regarding Mr. Willis' so-called willful trespass charges. That's right, I do remember. Then, of course, next thing you know, I had to come with them down here at the local police station in Upper Hutt to be locked up overnight. I mean, it's just crazy. That's correct. I'm thinking, what exactly have I done? But now I do remember now. That's right. Now, of course, at that time, I wouldn't know these sort of things. But you soon learn. I soon learn now. Well, I am now representing myself. Regarding these charges. So on the 28th of July at 10 a.m. we got to be there by that time. Mustn't be late, because that is the day, well, when I entered a not plea guilty on the 9th of June 2022, that's when the judge had a right to put down a date for a hearing. That's correct. So then I got given initial disclosure, everything else, in preparation for my court hearing. The defense, the date that I will be appearing, of course, to deliver my defense or my so-called submissions, is correct. But you've entered a not plea guilty. So on that day, the 28th of July, we must make sure that we comply with the bail conditions, because it could be that if you appear on that date with your affidavit, because you want to get off the charge, that's correct, shouldn't have been entered, because it was a mistake. Irrespective of whether the complainant had, trespass notice was valid, it was the fact that you didn't have the guilty mind to enter the property. That's correct. And you also entered by mistake. That is correct. So, therefore, why would you want to enter a charge against somebody who's not even dangerous, who came on the property, had a valid reason? That's correct. A justified legal obligation. That's correct. This noble is not a liar. That's correct. I actually do things, legally. But if you're going to want to retaliate and take advantage of the situation, take advantage of you again, that's correct, which is what they are so good at doing. I'm afraid this cannot continue on like this. I am going to protect myself and file restraining orders. That's correct. I don't need to be taken advantage of. And I don't need to be, given the criminal treatment either. Just because I was born in the islands, and just because I look indigenous, and just because I might have had a history in the past of such similar charges, don't mean that you can do that to me again. That's correct. Only this time it's genuine. That's correct. This cannot continue this way, people. You got to learn to apply your so-called civil liberties, but your legal rights, with some sort of leniency, but with civil. That's great. Be civil. And I won't have to throw your charge out of the courts because you're misusing it and you are abusing it. That's correct. Right. But I mean, if the New Zealand police force weren't so bloody racist and so prejudiced, but consider also the sergeant of the police station, and their assessment, my God, don't you dare look at me and think that I'm a sick person because I look this way. You know what I mean? Because there are people like my cousin. Just because my cousin looks so beautiful, that's great, and is among, intelligent people and has a good job, don't mean that that her judgment is sound. That's correct, because this is the impression I get from people in the system, that if certain people look the way that they do, they just automatically assume that they're stupid. It's correct. And it's only when they, appear in court and defend charges like this one, for me, that it's only realized, oh my gosh, look, this Snow Brown is actually a very, very important person. And also very sound in her judgment and very intelligent. That's correct. But look at the way that they undermined you. Trying to undo my Bachelor of Arts in Linguistics via the order of supervision that was a lot of bullshit from that Tony Shaw. That's correct. They really have undermined you, haven't they? And they set you up all this time. That's correct. You can imagine now how they must feel when they read your affidavit and suddenly realize that what? Oh, wow, the coconut knows how to write affidavit. Oh, the coconut is very intelligent. And yet, my God, do you know? I know, when I looked at the videos of the judges, the Samoan judges, the women that are half-caste Samoan and even Samoan, are actually judges in courts, not just here in New Zealand, but in the islands. What does that mean? Well, obviously, the coconuts are very intelligent. Even the half-caste ones. But this one here, well, I know, you are a real Trevoranus. Oh, I am a real Trevoranus. Don't underestimate and don't undermine me. That's great. Just because I look the way that I look, do you think I'm dumb? Or do you think that I might be Down syndrome or got a disability? Are you a disabled person? Does my brain... When you read my affidavit, that's great, with 5 defenses. Was there somewhere in your brain, somewhere in your so-called comprehension, that's great, that might have, made you think that maybe that I'm disabled? That I'm impaired in my brain? How did you feel? Did you dislike it because I sounded superior? Well, that ain't my problem either. That's correct. That I could write something like that and defend a charge, and I got a right to defend it. That's correct. And you can't handle. That ain't my problem. Now, is it my problem either that if a Pākehā from America, that's correct, decides to choose me to be his lawful wedded wife, that's correct. Is that my problem? No, that ain't my problem either, but it's none of your business. That's correct. What I do with my life, or whom I choose, or who chooses me to be his bride. That's correct. You can imagine now, oh, this case just gets more and more interesting. I know. You imagine now if you had a bachelor of, I don't know, a doctorate. No, I don't need a doctorate. Like the kind that some of the so-called New Zealanders have received from their communities. A PhD that has been via nomination. That's correct. I don't need that kind. I already got my own Dr. Snowbrown. That's correct. I hope you all have a nice evening. Well, let's say morning. But as for the rest of my so-called friends of Facebook, thank you for your support. Pray for me. That's correct. And not to worry. I mean, thank God I'm not going to be intelligent enough for the likes of Apostle Brian Tamati, who spent 9 days in prison, in jailbird. That's correct, for breaching his bails. But I mean, obviously his lawyer has learned to understand the client more, understand and accommodate his needs. Whereas I, on the other hand, well, I should be representing myself. But I know how to look after myself, and I also know how to not breach these bail conditions. That's correct. So that I don't end up in jailbird like Brian Tamati for 9 days. Jesus Christ. Well, if that ever happens, I won't be able to get a clean slate. I won't even be able to leave New Zealand. That's correct. I won't even be able to travel overseas. If I should ever enter jailbird, that's correct, for breaching my bails. That's not likely to happen. But you better be very careful, and you better be on your toes. That's correct, because you never know what these guys are planning. Because they could take advantage, all right? So that's why you need to file the restraining order. We need to get them off your back. But we need to protect you as well. Oh, there's a lot of enemies, all right? There's a lot of them around that want to take advantage of you. They already have. Only this time, thank God I've got a guardian angel and an archangel. And looks like there's going to be a third one on the way. Your second honey, that's right, becoming archangel. Most powerful, seraphim, archangel, that's correct. Oh, don't ever underestimate the power of God, that's correct. I mean, you guys who are part of criminal organizations, let me tell you this. Get behind me, Satan, that's correct. Piss off. Get out of my kingdom. You don't belong in my kingdom. You're all unyoked. You're not equally yoked to me. That's correct. I suddenly realized. Do you know that if you're a part of a criminal organization, you don't have a right to enter any kingdom, especially my kingdom? That you don't even have, your opinions don't count at all. That's correct. Anything to do with me. Especially if your boss is Satan and my boss is Jesus and Holy Mother. Now you know. You'll take care of yourselves now. And don't go doing something that where somebody could enter a charge onto your criminal record. Now, as for the rest of the so-called snow sheeps and snow shepherds, be smart, be smart. Be on the watch. That's correct. Don't ever trust any police officers, especially in this country, New Zealand. Be very wary. Because I just don't trust them. I just don't trust them. New Zealand police is not to be trusted. They're not independent enough. But a lot of them are actually very racist and prejudiced. So I have discovered, I'd always known about it. I know. How they wouldn't serve your trespass notices. Is it because I might be sick with a mental disorder? That's called what? Womanhood? Oh, dear. I know. Did I say the wrong thing? Did you catch a nigger by the toe? Or was it a white nigger by the toe? Well, we can't all be Dr. Snowbrown now. Can we? Well, you don't need to be. But keep up with the studying. That's correct. Oh, it's not easy to get a degree from any university, I tell you right now. It never was easy for me to complete it in 3 years. That's correct. Can you imagine me getting, doing a paper like syntax, 300 level, and I got a B+. I know. It's unreal, I know. Not easy. You try doing it. You wouldn't even make it past the so-called B minus, let alone a B. That's correct. That's why I believe in my guardian angel. Oh, try doing Philosophy 101 something. I passed that one. But again, it is really hard. That's correct. My point is, it's not easy to get a degree. You can't cheat your way and you can't lie your way either. Just like I couldn't do that with my affidavit. Right. In the name of the Father, the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen.